tardes, buenos días a todos y a todas. Bienvenidos a un seminario más de estas sesiones de seminarios que organizamos dentro de la red REMAR, de oportunidades de integración en redes eléctricas iberoamericanas de las energías del mar. Y en esta ocasión vamos a contar con la presentación de Mario Vieira, que es un investigador del WAVEC Energy Center, que es uno de los centros de investigación en energías marinas más reputados de, bueno, diría que de todo el mundo, pero desde luego de Europa también. Y él nos va a hablar de, bueno, pues de un aspecto que es tremendamente interesante al mismo tiempo que complejo, porque nada más y nada menos que intenta cubrir el reto de definir las políticas energéticas intentando acercarlas a una metodología de cálculo numérico, lo cual no es fácil porque la mayoría de las decisiones sobre las políticas energéticas están basadas en factores muy difícilmente medibles. Entonces, el intentar aplicar metodologías que persiguen la medición de factores para sistematizar las decisiones de políticas energéticas es un reto tremendo. Bueno, pues ese reto es uno de los en los que trabajan desde WAVEC. Y además, en este caso, es uno de los, bueno, es la temática principal de uno de los artículos que se están desarrollando dentro de la red, con participación de muchos más socios. Y en concreto este artículo está ya en fase de revisión, está terminado, ha sido enviado, hemos recibido unos comentarios. Tenemos que solventar, aclarar algunos aspectos de, bueno, pues de intentar explicar un poco más claramente algunos aspectos, pero Mario hoy nos va a comentar en qué consiste esto que viene a denominarse análisis morfológico y que tiene esa utilidad de dar una lectura más entendible o intentar acercar de una manera cuantitativa las políticas energéticas. Espero haberlo dicho más o menos bien. Al menos es como...
Thank you, Marcus. I will be presenting in English. I'm sorry, but you have actually resumed morphological analysis so well that I don't know what to say anymore. I think you explained it very well with a very clear message. In fact, we are used to solve problems by the scientific methods, and it has a very clear path, and we are used to objective parameters and objective metrics and thresholds to evaluate our results. But when we want to analyze complex problems, and these complex problems are essentially socioeconomic problems or industrial problems that involve subjective factors, human interactions, etc. Then there's such subjectivity on the problem that it's very difficult to understand what will be the potential futures or what scenarios can we anticipate for that specific problem. And we actually discussed this with an entity in Portugal that is used to produce scenarios for certain technological problems, and they stated that this is a difficulty they have to scenarize the problem. And actually we have been working with them, and I will show you one case study of what we have been developing with them. So this is the structure of my presentation today. Okay, so as I told you, there are complex problems that are dependent on political, social, economic, and technological influences. And these uncertainties are non-reducible, so we cannot easily describe them. As I told you, when we have a mathematical problem, usually we have a clear path that we know we need to walk through to solve it. This is what essentially we do on our everyday life. However, when we have a social problem, okay, we have a problem that its solution, it's not linear. We don't reach there through a linear path. We need to understand that we can reach a solution, but that might not be the perfect solution. We might need to get to the problem again, or we might get new problems. So social problems have this character, okay? We cannot decompose them in stages. It's always exchanging from solution to problem. So one way to understand these and describe these problems is to systematize foresight. And why is this helpful? Because we can obtain scenarios that were not initially predicted. This is actually very important. And this is related with the next bullet, which is cover the entire possibility space. We want to be sure that we are covering all the possibilities of the future. Okay, and finally, we want to guarantee reproducibility. Okay, we want to be sure, we want to be certain that if different researchers use the same methodology, they will reach similar results. Okay, and this is quite important. So one example of a complex problem, I told you, we have been collaborating with LENEC, which is a public R&D institution in Portugal, and they were the ones responsible for developing the national map for the green hydrogen in Portugal. So they wanted to understand what were the best regions to implement hydrogen producing plants, green hydrogen producing plants. And for this problem, they proposed 4 scenarios, and this is quite interesting. How did they build these 4 scenarios? They told us, they discussed with experts, they internally have some experience on proposing scenarios, but these scenarios are proposed empirically. They do not have a tool that helps them define these scenarios. What is the problem here? Is that some of these scenarios can actually be overlapping. They might be missing on other scenarios, and these scenarios, if different experts were contacted, they could reach different scenarios. So you see, we're not covering the entire possibility space. We might be having overlapping, and we are not assuring reproducibility. So the morphological analysis is capable of structurizing complex problems, and it's based firstly on workshops with specialists. So we always need experts from a certain area. Okay, the knowledge of experts is fundamental. However, we have a structurized method. We need to identify the variables, the hypothesis for each variable, and we need to understand what pairs of hypotheses are preferable or are exclusions. And this is one of, if you remember, for the people that are here that participated in this process, this is crucial for the results. Then, with the help of a computational tool that we currently have in WAVEC, we can calculate the morphological space of solutions, and these solutions are potential futures, are scenarios. Okay, and when we have a morphological space, which is a space of futures, we can see that there are similarities between the futures how they get distributed in the morphological space. And if these features are close together, let's say in clusters, then they are more similar than others. I will show you this in the future. In the near future. So specifically for the research that we produced with the REMAR network, we started by developing the context. We defined the problem. We characterized the environment through a PESEL analysis. And then we started our morphological analysis. We identified the key variables, the hypothesis, and the cross-consistency matrix. And all of these three steps, actually from context up to cross-consistency, this was done through meetings with the specialists that we gathered from the REMAR group. Afterwards, internally, when we had all this information internally at Plus Atlantic, I was at Plus Atlantic at the time, we processed and analyzed these results. We analyzed the morphological spaces, we produced and implemented some clustering techniques. And finally, in the end, we proposed some scenarios that we believe cover the whole morphological space. And we compared these scenarios. Actually, this was not the case in REMAR. I'm sorry. This was the case for LANEG. We compared our results with the results from the empirical analysis of LANEG. Okay, I'm not going to lose too much time in here. Everyone knows what a PESEL analysis is. We at REMAR produced an analysis to evaluate what future can be expected for marine renewables in Portugal and Spain. So we started by characterizing the current standpoint of both countries. We tried to identify the bottlenecks of each area, and from this PESEL analysis, we identified what we believed to be the key variables. What variables influence the most of the future of marine renewables in the region. Then we built a matrix of hypotheses. So we proposed hypotheses for each of the variables. Okay, this is not specific to the problem. This is a generic example. So for each key variable, we proposed some hypotheses. Okay, so for this specific problem, marketplace would be a variable, and we would have, in this case, two hypotheses. Then we built the cross-consistency matrix, which is essentially analyzing all the pairs of hypotheses and seeing if these hypotheses can coexist. Okay, so if it makes sense for them to coexist, and some of them cannot coexist, we know from our empirical knowledge that they cannot, and so we will mark them with a red mark in here, so we know that they are not plausible, and then we tell the code, the computational tool, that they are not plausible. So as I told you, at WAVEC, we have the computational tool where we can implement these types of problems. It allows us to input the problem. So in the input region, we introduce to the routine the key variables, the hypotheses, and the exclusions. Okay, then on the scenario visualization part, we can analyze the distribution of the futures amongst the morphological space. And finally, we have a post-processing tool, which is the clustering tool, where we can aggregate scenarios that are similar to each other. And why is this clustering necessary? Because, well, if at the end we arrive with 5 potential futures, or saying it in another way, if our exclusions are such that we end up with, let's say, 4, 5, 6 scenarios, we don't need to cluster, to clusterize. But if we end up with 50, 20, 30 scenarios, then we will not be analyzing 30 scenarios. So we want to cluster and reduce, clusterize and reduce this number of potential scenarios. So I've shown you this. This is an example of an exclusion. So if there's no political support, you can't have social engagement. Okay, so this would be a complete exclusion. All the scenarios with this combination would be out of the possibilities, right? Another thing is regarding the scenario nomenclature. I don't think this is quite important for this presentation. If anyone here today wants, you can contact me and we can discuss this in more detail in a different meeting. Okay, please talk to me if you have any questions or doubts. This is an example of what the tool can, the outputs of what the tool can gives us. This is a proximity graph. The proximity graph, it's similar to a morphological map, but it tells us the similarities between scenarios. Okay. Now, I don't know what that is. Okay. Whatever. So as I told you, we have produced one case study with the REMAR group. What scenarios can we expect up to 2030 for the marine renewable energies? Actually, it's not in the Iberian Peninsula, it's in Portugal and Spain, because the Macaronesian region was also analyzed. These are the entities that were involved in this research. And finally, case study 2, which I've told you before, we cooperated with LENEC on the systematization of the generation of potential scenarios, future scenarios for the implementation of green hydrogen in the country. In this case, for Portugal. Okay, so this is the grid of key variables and hypotheses that we built with the REMAR group. So to everyone here that was participating in this research, you already know this. This is our cross-consistency matrix. Okay, so we built this matrix with the collaboration of everyone involved. It was quite interesting. It's a great exercise, and we started to obtain some very nice results. Actually, let me just clarify here. The yellow combinations are low possibilities, and the red combinations are exclusions. So here on the left, only the red squares are exclusions, and on the right, the low possibilities are also exclusions. So you see, obviously, the more exclusions you input on your analysis, the less number of scenarios you'll have in the end. Oh, actually, I had it here. Yeah. So then we can see that we can distribute this space with a different hypothesis from each variable. For example, the first variable was political support, and we had 3 hypotheses. And this is how they distribute along the morphological space. For the maritime use conflicts variable, we had this hypothesis distribution. For the blue economy growth, we had this distribution. For the social impact variable, we had this distribution. For the infrastructure, we had this hypothesis distribution, and up to the last variable. Okay, so if we aggregate everything, we look at this, and it's quite it's kind of a mess, right? It's difficult to distinguish between different future scenarios. Obviously, we can try to do our best guess. So if we did a visual, or let's say a human clustering, or a manual clustering, so this is not computationally processed clustering. This was done by humans manually. So we can definitely distribute the space with 5 clusters, but it's difficult to understand what's going on in the empty spaces. So we need better tools for this. We have implemented in our source codes some clustering techniques, okay, which helps us clusterize, separate, aggregate scenarios according to their similarities. And this is an example of how we can distribute this problem into 5 clusters. Well, using another method, you can see it's different. Using another method, clustering method, we will get different results. Okay, so then this is a question of having the sensibility, the empirical knowledge of understanding what is the clustering that makes more sense for this specific problem. Yeah, so these are all examples of different aggregation methods. Finally, and this is part of the results we presented at the paper that Marcos told you about before, that we submitted, we came up with five clusters or 5 scenarios that are, on our opinion, and based on the results of the morphological analysis, representative of what could happen in the future. So one possible future is wishful thinking, where everything will work out on the better way possible, but well, obviously this is plausible, but it's difficult to happen. One thing that it's important for this analysis is that we are not trying to quantificate probability of a certain scenario to happen, because there's no probability. It will just depend on a certain number of variables, right? The second cluster is where we have everything set, but we didn't have an addition of offshore infrastructure, which, as you know, it's necessary to connect, let's say, offshore farms to the grid. The plausible future 3, you have small improvements on every areas, but it's just not sufficient to push the sector forward. And I just want to say, if this sounds too simplistic or too high level, on our paper we really tried to decompose these scenarios and to describe them thoroughly. Finally, we have the 2 clusters on the right, which are actually, here they are green, but they shouldn't be green, because these are the worst scenarios. On scenario 4, we actually have some improvements, but there was just no innovation on the field. There was no experimentation. There was no maturity growth on the technologies. So we will not have a bright future for marine renewables. And finally, in cluster 5, we called it "everything is terrible," because everything goes against what we expected, and there is absolutely no future for marine renewables in Portugal and Iberia. So we started, actually, in the beginning we had, I think it was 20 key variables, and then we reduced these variables to 7 key variables, and each key variable had 2, 3, 4 hypotheses. So if we calculate the potential scenarios, we would obtain 400 or something. 400, no, sorry, 400,000. Okay, so these are lots and lots and lots of solutions, and from a problem that had thousands of solutions, we came up with 5 potential futures that we believe through this methodology that describe well what can happen in the future. So the LANEC case study, it's very similar on the methodology. It's exactly the same methodology. However, the problem is different. So we had to implement another pestle analysis. Okay, and actually you could argue, for those that were participating on the REMAR group activity, you could argue and say, look, Mario, the variables are so similar. And it's true. And the problems are not that different because we have a new technology that we want to implement. It's a technology that is not yet mature. So it is a very similar problem, but you will see the results are completely different. The morphological space is completely different. And this is why. This is because the hypotheses are different and the cross consistency matrix is fundamentally different. Okay, so we are in reality discussing a new problem. And this is the morphological space of this new problem. So you can see that it's considerably different than the morphological space that we have obtained from REMAR. There are 2 similarities, which is on the right we have no political support, and on the left to no political support we have slow innovation. So it seems that for these types of problems, these 2 are walking together, but which totally makes sense, right? But then on the left, it's completely different, okay? Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. This is a bit confusing, I'm sorry. But this is the morphological space, and this is important. Do you remember the 4 scenarios that LANEC proposed in the beginning? This is how we distribute them on the morphological space. So I could ask you, what do you see that is wrong in here? But what is going on is that they are proposing 4 scenarios. 2 of them are overlapping. Diversificado and perspective, they are the same thing for our morphological space. Then the SECA and Rede de Gás e Transportes, it's a very extensive, it's a very extended scenario, cluster, sorry. And the ports and industry cluster is also very extended. And more than that, there are potential futures that are not being considered. And this is, for me, together with the clusters being quite big, and when I say big, they are they cover a wide range of the morphological space, but we have scenarios here that are not being taken into consideration, and this is a great risk. Okay, so I hope I convinced you right now about the benefits of using morphological analysis. So obviously what we did was to implement our clustering techniques on this problem. And you can see here, for example, we have 6 clusters, I believe. 1, unsuccessful implementation. 2, domestic and ports use. And we have offshore wind. What we introduced, what we used as input for the model was different market sectors, and then the clusterization, what is telling us is that the port and the domestic use might have something in common. Okay, so this is giving us clues of what the future might hold. So if we have use on ports of hydrogen, then we will probably have domestic use. Okay, these are computationally proposed clusters. Okay, this is not manually proposed. Then we have a third cluster where we would have use from the transports. These transports would be essentially cars, trucks, and ports. We have offshore wind, and we have new infrastructure. So obviously new infrastructure is needed for what? For transportation. We need logistics for transport and distribute the hydrogen to the vehicles. And for ports, obviously we need new infrastructure. Then we have cluster 4 with transport and domestic use. No offshore wind, and notice how with no offshore wind we don't have ports consumption. We have accelerated innovation on the sector, and we have new infrastructure. Then we have the 5th cluster with broad implementation, and this means that we will be consuming hydrogen in all sectors. Okay, and finally we might have domestic use only with no offshore wind. Okay, so we presented these results to LENEG and said, look, we believe this should be your 6 clusters, even if you don't, or proposed scenarios, even if you don't want to analyze cluster 1, because obviously it's not very interesting for the future of Portugal, but the other 5 would be very interesting. They would cover the whole possibility range of scenarios, and we propose this to LENEG, and we are actually redoing this analysis, because the analysis that I just shown you was done internally by Plus Atlantic, and now at WAVEC, LENEG saw the opportunity and is collaborating with us on redefining this problem. So we redefined with them the variables, the hypotheses, and the cross consistency matrix. It's actually already built, and we are trying to implement it now. So I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry. For the conclusions of my presentation, what are the advantages? We decrease the risk and the certainties associated with the planning of future scenarios for complex problems. We systematize the definition of the scenarios, so we try to guarantee to a certain extent the scientific reproducibility of our research. And this is one of my favorite advantages. We anticipate possibilities that we haven't considered to be possible. So future work. Yeah, Marcus told you, we submitted a paper. We are trying to publish it. It will be a great challenge because we are aiming high, but I think we will be okay. We will hopefully be collaborating with LENEG for the problem of hydrogen and in other problems that they might have to analyze in the future. And we are continuously improving our computational tool, especially on the clustering level, using advanced clustering algorithms, etc., etc. So I know that for some of you this might have been too much information, but if you want to discuss these methods with me, please send me an email and we can discuss these with more detail. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Mario. Estupendo la explicación, aunque bueno, yo soy consciente de que es un tema complejo hasta que no se analiza con cuidado. It is important to go twice through the text and to see carefully the system. And also there's an important mathematical tool behind
Yes.
this explanation, and sometimes just going through it is difficult without knowing exactly what is doing this tool. But once it is analyzed, it is an amazing tool to define the possibilities of this. So
Yes.
yeah.
Let me just comment, Marcos, regarding what you said. One analysis of this type would be impossible to do without a computational tool. Okay, so this is important. We need two very important aspects: a group of experts which can help us define the problem, and then the computational tool. Without either of the two, we can't produce one analysis of this type.
Great. Bueno, yo creo que es momento, vamos a dar paso a preguntas. Como primera pregunta, si os parece, ¿está bien si hablo un poco en español, Mario?
Sí, perfecto.
Lo entiendes perfectamente. Tenemos una pregunta de
Gracias a
Pablo
vosotros.
Ruiz Minguela. Sorry.
Gracias a vosotros.
Muy bien. Tenemos una pregunta en el chat de Pablo Ruiz Minguela que hace referencia a, creo que era quizá en la página 13 o por ahí, quiero recordar, si podemos ponerla, que es donde haces el morfológico, sí, cualquiera de estas, cualquiera de las, no, entonces quizás, no, perdona, un poco más adelante, cuando representas en el plano todos los, un poco más adelante, sí, cualquiera de estos esquemas, él pregunta que cuáles son las dimensiones de los ejes, que en base a qué se representan esos escenarios de esta manera, por qué se representan así.
The axis.
The axis.
Yes, yes. So that's a very common question. It's a good one, very good one.
Yeah.
The distances between the scenarios are relative. So in fact, the axes have no meaning here. So we could actually remove the axis. It's just how MATLAB is presenting the data. What we have here is a problem in this specific case of 7 variables. Okay, so it's a 7-dimension problem, and we are transforming this 7-dimension problem into a two-dimension problem, and this is what we're looking for. So these are relative distances between scenarios, not absolute distances regarding one certain quantity.
Sí, let me just add some few things. If we had, si tuviésemos pares o elementos con solo dos números, sería muy fácil representar en el plano, porque exactamente esas dos serían las dimensiones. Incluso si fuesen tres, lo podríamos representar en el espacio y podríamos colocar cada punto de esa manera. Pero al ser 7, es como si estuviésemos en un espacio de 7 dimensiones y no hay una representación gráfica asumible. Pero sí hay un método de llevar ese espacio de 7 dimensiones a un espacio de 2, ¿no? Es something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Bueno, ¿tenemos alguna más preguntas? Sí. Yo sí que tengo alguna. Cuando representas en la tabla, creo que estaba un poco antes, página 13 creo, cuando representas para cada variable los valores que le das valor 1, 2 o 3.
Sí.
don't remember where.
Uh,
Yeah.
não, é mais à frente.
Yeah, that one.
This
Back,
this one.
this one.
Yes.
Bueno, tú aquí das algunas variables tienen valor 1, 2 o 3 porque es mucho apoyo, medio apoyo y nada de apoyo.
The hypothesis, yes.
Three hypotheses. But some
Yes.
others, you only have 2.
Mhm.
In this case, why do you use, or the fact of using 1 and 2 and not 1 or 3 is something related to the method? It has to be like that?
No, and I actually it's maybe to answer that question, we could look at the case of the
in this case,
Laennec situation. So
Mm.
we want the hypothesis to cover all the possibilities. Okay, so sometimes 2 might be sufficient, but sometimes we might want to have more. For this specific analysis, we had 2 in almost all the variables, but in the market sectors, we assumed 5. Right, so we don't have a limitation there. It's really flexible, and it really depends on the discussion with the experts and what they believe are the necessary hypotheses to describe that specific variable. So there's no limitation.
It is not important to say, for instance, in this slide you're presenting, in the first one, if the good support mechanisms you put in the 2 or in the 4 or in the 5, it is not important.
If the experts believe that that would be an advantage, for example, I told you that I did I redid this exercise with Laennec, and we had proposed only 2, and they wanted to have 4 hypotheses on political support because they wanted to have political support but no regulatory framework, no political support but licensing, but easy licensing. So you can start to decompose this if you feel like it's relevant for the investigation. The drawback here is that the more hypotheses you have, the more scenarios you will have, so the entire analysis will be more complex.
Okay, I'll see. Oh. Okay, that's good. ¿Alguna pregunta tenemos por ahí? Creo que en el chat, no sé si había alguna. Yeah, there's another one from Pablo. In line with Marco's question, is it a requirement of the method to assume that all hypotheses are equally spaced in the morphological representation? Right.
I don't know if I understand the question, Pablo. Yeah. Maybe what you
Puedes.
Creo que me oís.
Sí.
Can you hear
Pablo.
me?
Sí, Pablo.
Okay. Hi. Well, I'm new to this method. Thank you, Maria, for your detailed explanation. I think it's quite interesting, the approach. Yeah. I think Marcus was questioning earlier that there were different parameters that have different number of hypotheses. My question is, if I have 2 hypotheses, do I space them equally? If I have 3, are they spaced equally? And how do they compare the space with 5 or more hypotheses? So it's about
in the
Yes,
morphological
represented.
space.
Yeah, represented
Yes,
mathematically.
yes. It's all about how the transformation from in this case 7 dimensions to 2 dimensions is done. So it's the algorithm that is calculating these distances. Okay, so it's not that the hypotheses are equally spaced. Is that the morphological space? It's comparing different scenarios, not different hypotheses. I don't know if I'm responding to your question. I can say another thing, that there have been people that have inquired us about the possibility of existing variables that have a bigger weight than other variables. Okay, on the relevance of the problem, and this is something that we can do, but that we still haven't implemented. But right now, the weight of all the variables and the weight of the hypothesis is the same.
Thank you.
Pablo, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, more or less. I will be glad to review the paper once published, and I will learn more about the method.
Thank you, Pablo.
And Mari, I have another question, and it is related to the end of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we finally clusterized these scenarios, and we selected one representative cluster, or let's say this vector, because it's like a set of numbers, vector as well, yes, which is representative of a future scenario, whatever. And we have, in this example, we are looking, we have 5. And from these 5 scenarios, we have to interpret the future to see what happened, what can be the future, depending on what are the different, let's say, measures we take in our, for instance, policies. Can you just go through these final values or decisions we get, and just put an example for the people to know what is really the useful or the useful meaning of these results? Because it is nice to concentrate and to summarize all the possible situations into 5 different, let's say, codes. But now it comes the good thing, which is, how can I interpret this result in terms of, for instance, can we go through this final slides and see what happens depending on if we have or not political support?
Mario, I don't know you, but I cannot hear Marcos.
Let me switch the...
I'm hearing a bit bad, but I think Marcos wanted to see the final slides. This one, Marcos?
Yeah, sorry,
now it's better. Now it's better, Marcos. Yes.
Yeah, I always happen. After 7 minutes, my microphone is tired, and I have to change it. So I was saying, just going through this, and let's interpret the results of each cluster, thinking in the variables, because let's remember that the first one I have here, first one is political support, the second is space use conflicts, the third is blue economy, the next is social impact, support infrastructures, the TRL of the technology, and methods and data. And the final one is data, the availability of data. So
Exactly.
can we just give an example of what would happen in case of having a higher one or a lower one in one of them? Because
Sure.
now, yeah, go ahead.
You just need to tell me which are each variable, because I don't remember. But for example, for wishful thinking, well, I told you before, it's everything is
Yeah, I give you an
best
example.
expected. Yes.
Let's think about one. What is that? Is let me select what TRL.
Okay. Is it the fourth, the fifth?
Is the sixth?
Okay, so the sixth, we can see that in clusters 4 and 5, the sixth is 1.
Yeah, it's low, and in the others is high.
Exactly.
Or middle.
So in clusters 4 and 5, actually this is not cluster, this is a representative scenario of the cluster. Okay, 4 and 5 are already final scenarios. For these two, we know that in these futures we will not have mature technology. We will not have commercially available technology. And in the other three, the sixth variable takes the value 2, and 2 means high TRL. So for all these three, we are assuming that we will have commercially available marine renewable devices. I don't know if I'm answering, but I can give you another example.
The point is, I was trying to look at it in the other way, which is, in case my TRL is low, which is 1.
No, one is high.
Ah, 1 is high. Okay.
No,
so,
sorry, 1 is low. Exactly.
Okay, so in case it is low,
1 is low.
I only can go through clusters 4 and 5, right?
Yes, exactly.
So the rest of variables would keep in those values that are in cluster 4 or 5.
Yes.
I cannot go with, let's say, I'm just looking at your screen, and cluster 1 says the first value, which is political support, is 3, is the maximum. So is it a conclusion of this analysis that in case my TRL is low, I will never have the maximum political support?
Yes. Then we actually defined that and on the exclusions. That's exactly what it means, Marcos.
Okay, so I was looking to find this kind of conclusions from the analysis.
Yes, exactly. And you can think about it. Why would a technology with no maturity have political support, or at least indications that we will get commercial? That actually happened in Portugal, but yeah, that with marine renewables, but that's another question. So yeah, I think that's exactly what it means, Marcos.
So now the point is try to take some ideas about these codes and the relationship between ones and the others. What is the meaning of them?
And I think that the comment from the editor goes through that,
right, that way. Yeah,
to that direction.
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
And that is exactly what I'm trying to.
Yes, I understand, Marcos.
do.
Yes.
I'm preparing a table I think you guys will like, and is
Perfect.
trying to get some ideas in this direction.
Perfect, Marcos.
So, more further questions, más preguntas por parte de la audiencia. Bueno, si no, tal y como estaba diciendo Mario, pues él queda encantado de que le hagáis preguntas por otro lado. Y por supuesto, pues todos estamos esperando que el paper salga finalmente a la luz, que creo que no va a tardar mucho. Y creo que efectivamente va a ser un buen trabajo.
Muchas gracias, Marcos.
Así que muchas gracias de nuevo, Mario, por tu presentación y por el trabajo que habéis hecho, pues no solo tú, sino todas las personas que han estado trabajando en el grupo de trabajo de Península Ibérica y Macaronesia para desarrollar este paper.